for the time being. It's a lot darker than it needs to be. So whoever says one will also then introduce themselves, and then two will take over and read the rest. Make it easy. Okay.
Welcome to Two Beers and a Podcast with Brad and Mike, two marketing guys with a love of great craft beer, and the stories go with them. I'm Mike Rattay, the visual guy.
And I'm Brad Fruhoff, the word guy. And the show is all about the experience of beer, from the label to the glass, from the brew house to the bar. Each week we feature two beers we feel have something to say or that we think worth saying something about.
So this week we are looking at Maplewood and Toppling Goliath. I think we're going to start with Maplewood, the Charlatan American Pale Ale.
So these are two pale ales from the Midwest, we'll say.
Yeah.
So Maplewood's located in Logan Square area of Chicago neighborhood.
A very unassuming spot. Actually had a Lyft driver get me there, and it's like right next to the highway or right next to the train tracks.
Yeah.
At the
you
end
kind
of
of
the
have to know it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank goodness for GPS. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have known to really turn down. I think next to a storage unit or something.
They're currently they apparently are the first craft brewery and distillery in Chicago. So they got that going for them. Let's have a look at Charlatan. Oh.
So I taste that Simcoe right away. The not as citrus.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm a fan. I've heard some people have some very negative feelings about Simcoe, kind of like the cilantro, where some people just can't do it, and they've heard it. They think it tastes like cat stuff. But I named my cat Simcoe, but I do. I am a fan of the hop,
Mm-hmm.
and that's basically what I get at most. They do have, looks like they have Citra and Centennial. Citra, of course, being in Zombie Dust and a lot of Citra beers. Centennial being in Bell's Two Hearted and a lot of other lemony citrus beers. But the Simcoe kind of stands out for me.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's a little more. I don't know if you want to call it floral exactly, but or herbal.
Yeah, herbal. I think herbal, almost piney is kind of what I'd...
Yeah, heading towards the piney.
But delicious.
Yeah, so it is a different... I feel like I've been drinking a lot of juicy IPAs in particular. Even ones that aren't, not just outside of the North New England style that's been so big. Just a lot of people are, with Mosaic and Amarillo, and some of those I love, as beers. I'm really digging them, but... so this stands out as something that is in a different kind of flavor palette in a nice way. It's a different change of pace.
Right. But it's so many with the Citra and the Centennial. It's such a similar kind of taste, but slightly different. So this place, they're fairly new. I think in 2016 they got their distribution deal.
Right. Well, so they were around as they originally were called Mercenary Brewing, and they got into some trouble with Odell Brewing because Odell has their Mercenary Double IPA, which is spelled with a Y, and is a beer rather than a brewery. But Odell said it's going to create confusion in the market, and that's certainly a legit concern. They ultimately decided, the founders of Maplewood ultimately decided, let me get their names, the McGallis brothers and Adam Cieslak, it just wasn't worth fighting Odell over it. Odell did let them sell out the rest of their product with the label, Mercenary label. Excuse me. And then they had to basically rebrand themselves in the most absolute way possible as Maplewood. And now I didn't know them as Mercenary. So I'm not sure like how big a move it was visually and in terms of what they were producing, but they have definitely gone to this kind of little bit very sort of abstract look, I would say, and where it's presenting themselves as a pretty classy beer option, even though they're also making a very clear like Chicago connection, which Chicago sort of in general still has a kind of working class kind of connotation, you know. But these guys are not really going to be trying to be the working class drinkers beer so much. They're producing unusual and often bigger or sort of bolder beers, let me say, if not bigger. They're really distinctive in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I don't know if you'd call that like a crisp, smooth kind of new branding, packaging style. But that M, I mean, that's slick. Is that the right word that I want to do? Anyways, this is 6.1%. You can't really taste the booze as much. It's just fairly smooth. And, you know, jumping right over to their social media, they're doing a good job as the smaller, local, community-oriented for the most recent post where they're actually showing a lot of different people. They're showing a lot of playfulness with some of their beer posts. Lately, of course, the food. They do serve food at their, what are they calling it, a lounge?
Yeah.
Maplewood Lounge. So
what the heck is that?
They definitely do that. But they are showing some playfulness.
I believe, yeah, that's right. Here they have a picture of a pina colada. They have a, I think I was listening. He was on Adam Smith as one of their, I think one of our brewers, or he was on Beer Temple podcast and talking about their smoothie machine. So they do pina coladas and I think pug slides they call them with their Fat Pug Stout. And it looks like a fair number of hazier style beers, interestingly, but also there's some very clean looking ones. Yeah, in this particular picture here, Berliner Weiss.
Side note: I did have their Son of Juice this weekend, and it was, I remember it was fairly hazy, but it was this kind of beer without the Simcoe. It just tasted like a juicy citrus kind of explosion, and I ended up having a couple because they were just very, very nice. So if you're looking without that Simcoe bite, Son of Juice would be another good one to kind of jump to.
And thinking from the storytelling marketing side of things, one thing I was surprised to find on their website is it's very bare bones, maybe? No, I don't want to say bare bones. It's very minimalistic. It's probably a better way to put it. They have, who they are. They have a tagline. You can find, get the information about the lounge. The picture itself is not of the lounge or of people drinking their beer. Or even of the beer. It's just of the fermenters. Looks like, just a pretty industrial kind of picture to put on. It's not the most sort of
inviting.
It doesn't exactly say like, "Hey, come check out our lounge," and really not a lot of like who we are, what we're about. Like, just even an about section. They just, if there is one, I'm not seeing it. You can easily get to social media, which is of course imperative, and they're doing nice stuff, as we said, on social media. But if I want to know more about who these guys are, I'm not getting it from the webpage, and that's a little disappointing. Even not just as a drinker, but like, let me put it the other way. Not just as a guy who's researching for his podcast, but as a drinker, as a drinker who might want to just know who are these people, who's working here, who's who created this place, what are they about, what are they doing. Even maybe I heard the story about they used to be mercenary, and where's that story? These are all things that could be on here, and we're just not getting it. So I was a little surprised to find that, because I do think of them as a brewery who I'm seeing their beers on the shelves in a lot of places I go, I think of them as a brewery who is making really solid beers, especially when they're coming out with bombers of their sort of limited release. I'll often try to check those out. Because I think they're creative and don't know exactly fun is not exactly the brand they're going for, which but intriguing is maybe a better way to put it.
And I think you hit it. That was probably the right word. Minimalistic is probably what I want to call the can too, because it is. I mean, even the Charlatan on the top and on the front, it's just basically a white outline of a guy with a nice hat and a little goatee, which really just kind of speaks to that tall, slim M with just the one Chicago star kind of as their image. But
yeah, it's a very design-oriented look, but it's also something that's easily adapted to new brands as they come out with them. Just come up with some kind of iconic image that represents it, and so you always, and then the backgrounds are really kind of what I think root the package visually. It sort of draws your attention for the colors, then you kind of figure out, you see what the design is, and so those I think are working in interesting ways together.
Back to your story too about them, I think that's part of what sells a lot of these local breweries is really just pitching who the person is. Like whether it could be the same story that a lot of people have had, I think, where, the home brewer that had the dream kind of thing. It's still interesting to read it. You still want to know even whatever they did before that, or how they're combining the two, how many original people, that thing's, it's just interesting. And it helps with a brand. It helps really tie you to it and figure who they are, get to know them better, and then just want to support them.
When you got two brothers as part of it,
right,
like that, even that is sort of interesting as anybody who has siblings. So Paul and Ari McGallis, it's always kind of interesting to think about, like, well, shoot, I never started a business with my brother. I don't know if that would go very well, frankly. So that family story, I think, has something there, and I don't know how they knew Adam's Sislak, but obviously you can wrap that in to kind of how do they all come together and say, like, hey, this is worth doing and worth putting the strain on our relationship, which is inevitable, no matter how strong it is. So all that stuff is part of what is something they can bring into this.
I agree, and I think they are, like, not too much of a written story, but again, they're Instagram and they're really telling a decent story about the people. It looks like they're all. This is the Husky Pants post. They definitely look like they're having a lot of fun in their posts, with I think is also kind of key. With, you just want to buy from people that are having a lot of having fun. So they're showing some of the process. They're showing some of the special ingredients that they do, and just continually reminding people of all the different things that are going into the beer, and all the fun that they're having is just definitely tells a bit of the story. So
and I like that they're connecting the craft beer and the spirit side. They're not just like separate things. I know I can't remember where I heard it, but in terms of brewers getting into spirits and distilling, it's I heard somebody say it's just like the next step in the chemistry, sort of. If you really get into thinking about what's going on when you're making a beer, then you go like, well, what happens if I run it through this distilling process after that? And so there's visually, of course, the brand remains consistent into the spirits, but they even have their Fat Pug whiskey, which has some kind of inspiration from their stout, I believe, and that kind of continuity. I'm not sure. There's a lot of market research I'd be really interested in to see, like, how many craft drinkers are also spirits drinkers. I know among millennials, I've seen some research about this, that they're promiscuous in every sense of the word, regarding styles, and their choice of alcohol. So if they go out, to them, wine, beer, at least according to the research. Wine, beer, spirits, it's all sort of on the table as an option tonight. So having some continuity, and so like you're maybe just kind of get that loyalty to the Maplewood brand.
Right.
So I know Two Spirits is just saw some of their spirits, or Two Brothers. I saw some of their spirits on the shelf the other day, and New Holland I think of too is doing spirits, and they're brands that I want to try because I like the beer they're doing. I don't know that I see a lot of like continuity or any kind of sense of like these are from the same place, other than that they have the same sort of the same name, and maybe you don't need that, but it's kind of fun to see it.
It helps. It's an easier mind association trick if you know like that M on their whiskey is very easy to juxtapose or just like put two and two together. They're like, oh yeah, they make the beer, and that's because that is that is the label on their spirits, and so just seeing it on all the beers, it is an easy step one, step two. And you're right. Yeah, now that more breweries kind of get a little more, I think once they get into the black, that they have a little more time, a little more space, a little more money, that they can start experimenting. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's just more time with a lot of the distilling, right? I mean, obviously a couple other
and then aging,
pieces of instrument,
right.
But then, because you obviously don't want to do a 5-year aged, thing right off the bat. You got to make some money first, and then 5 years later, then have it released. So,
and that's something I'll admit, like I don't know a whole lot about in terms of the spirit world. How many people in the spirit world have any knowledge of craft brands? So if I'm looking at the bourbon shelf and I see the Two Brothers show up, or the Maplewood. I'm looking at their rye malt whiskey. I like a rye. If I'm looking at rye and I see the Maplewood, if I don't know the brand already, as a beer brand, like
right.
what are, like how do you pull me in from that end versus how much of their market is really people who know them as a beer company and are like, hey, like you're doing spirits too, like cool, I like spirits once in a while, I'll check that out. And is that enough to sustain a spirit business, to have like your craft people who once in a while want spirits?
Right.
My guess is if you really want to do a lot in spirits, you're going to have to find a way to speak the language of the spirits people and think about them as a separate customer group. Yeah.
That, or even the one-off, because like kind of thinking about them for a Christmas or a birthday gift, that if I know that you like the Mad Hatter from
Belgium.
New Holland. Sorry, there we go. So if I know that you like Mad Hatter from New Holland, that for your birthday or Christmas, then I'll see that might be a nice gift that I'd want to get you. So that could be one sort of cross-marketing way that they'll just be gifted the spirit of the brewery that they know, that someone always has the beers at their house. So that's kind of one way that's possible. And then, of course, having just reps doing their tastings at the liquor store is always a good way to kind of intrigue and entice. And I don't know, discounts are it's a tough game to play, but if you want people to try it in hope that you just sell them right off the bat, that's a good way. Because what is it, Jameson? You got a couple other bigger ones that people are
right. There's some bigger ones that other people are going to go to, and I think, well, it's their craft spirits. I think are where craft beer was maybe 20 years ago or so, where they're coming in at higher price points because they have to, and are making the play on flavor and process rather than on price. Right. And so there's, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's exciting to go down the spirits aisle and see some of all the different like craft spirits people coming out with stuff. It's interesting to see them popping up in little neighborhoods around. There's one out by where I grew up in Lake Zurich, Illinois now. So I think that's a fine place for them to live right now, is just we're not going to compete with Jameson. We're not going to be like your mixing spirits necessarily. Or if we are, it's going to be for like, so we're not. Don't throw us in a ginger ale. Throw us in with like make a nice Manhattan or something. Yeah, and kind of play that game of like this is like not for, this is worth spending the extra money on. And frankly, I was thinking about this with Few Distillers, so right around the corner. They're craft distillers. Used to live right around the corner from them, and they're at a higher price point than I normally go for my average bottle of whiskey. But on the other hand, like at home, I don't drink whiskey that often. I was thinking about it, like maybe it's worth spending $50-$60 on a bottle for like stuff that I really like.
That'll last a year.
It's gonna last me, however long, and it lasts a really long time. And I'm not probably gonna be mixing it a whole lot. And but even if I did, like I would know how to mix it into things that were gonna be nice.
Not just sugar.
Right. So, and that might be a good place to play for these guys too, who are trying to do both.
That is another, just as we're saying that another market that really isn't. Once you start getting into the spirits, the other market is the mixers. Mm-hmm. So like I know Goose did the pop or does like root beer and like some sodas.
Right.
That would be an interesting. You actually make your mix, your Bloody Mary mix or whatever like non-alcoholic wort that you that you could mix as like a sugarish water that you carbonate without booze, and then you to kind of use that as a little drop with some of your spirits.
Interesting, yeah.
That'd be interesting. That just all those little you can still, they're in the same market, but they're in like just slightly different. So,
and I'm as these guys are, what did I just say? I think they had to rebrand in 2015. I'm not sure how long they were around as Mercenary before that. Only 8,000 followers on Instagram. It's a solid start.
For 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah. So, plenty of room to grow for them. I'd like to see, I hope they continue growing. I think they've got something good going on. I think there's just, like we were saying last episode with Off Color, there's just so much room for more story with these guys. Verbally, certainly, and it's how I think, but
it translates. I mean, the words translate to the images. So I mean, there's just all that room, and then just seeing them. I think the nice thing too. There's so many. April of 2015 is when they actually started their Instagram. So I wonder if that's partly when they started, but just all these beer fests too. Just like consistently seeing Maplewood at the Oak Park Beer Fest, or if they still do that one, not at Double Door, but Aragon or whatever that one is. So I mean, as long as they keep showing up at more of those events, that's another way for them to just easily get their way out. And then of course, I feel like I'm starting to see them in a lot of craft beer bars, and so I think that's just
getting out there,
getting the sales to do that. So
good deal. Cheers, Maplewood.
2 cheers to Maplewood. I'm just gonna plug this in real quick.
All right, let's crack open this Toppling Goliath, the Psuedo Sioux. I just found these guys myself maybe 6 months ago. I think I noticed them a little bit before that, but maybe for whatever reason wasn't sure what to make of them. And then I started trying their stuff. I think I probably started with Psuedo Sioux, and I've been really big on these guys. I really enjoyed trying the stuff they're doing.
As you open that beer, you just kind of get the nose of what they're doing. I don't want to start talking about hops before I know about it, but it does smell very citrusy and.
Oh yeah. Citra hop. Yeah, I was gonna say Citra. Yep. Single hop pale.
Oh, single hop Citra. So that's.
Yeah.
So they basically they're taking the hop that everyone is really in love with right now, and they're making only a beer with only that, which is genius. It shows, one, that they're, of course, paying attention to the trends of the market. They know that everyone is in love with those, with the Citra hop, and so they're just literally putting it in front of you. So they're from Iowa, but of course we were able to get them here in Chicago, so their distribution goes Midwest.
Yeah, they have an 8-state distribution.
Okay.
And I can't remember through whom, but it started in 2009, and I'm not sure how long they've been in the States, in Illinois. Again, like I feel like I maybe saw something as long ago as like a year.
Mm-hmm.
I could be off on that. But yeah, everything I've tried of theirs I've enjoyed and been big on. Taking them to, smaller parties where I can, just break them open with some guys who appreciate it. And they've gotten some really good sort of online affirmation, let's say. So Rate Beer named their Kentucky Brunch Brand Stout the #1 beer in the world in 2015. Wow. And Beer Advocate named them the 2nd best brewery in the world on some date that they didn't specify on their website. So that's pretty high praise. 2000, for being in business about 9 years now. Excuse me. And let's see. Like I said, yeah, I like a lot of what they're doing. Their Psuedo, I still haven't figured out. They have a picture of them of Barb and Clark Louie, the founders, a homebrewing couple people love their homebrew, so they started brewing, going into business. And interestingly, it says they're world renowned. It says online for IPAs and barrel aged stouts. I think I've had one of their IPAs because you can't get in their cans, and even their bombers that are coming out tend to be more in the pails, and I think there's an oatmeal stout in cans, the Rover truck. So yeah, I'm waiting to see Toppling Goliath, more of your world-renowned barrel-aged stouts. I'd be super excited to see some of that. I also know that they have the Field Museum logo on here, and to me, like the one thing that has just been kind of baffling, and I didn't have time to do enough research because we're throwing all this together very quickly, just so we don't scare ourselves into not doing it. But the Psuedo is apparently some kind of collaboration with the Field Museum. Off Color, who we talked about last episode, also has several collaborations with the Field Museum, including one called Tooth and Claw, which features an image of Sue on the label. So to me, this is very confusing.
Sue gets around.
Sue, everybody can make a Sue ale, and maybe that's why it's called Pseudo. Of course, Psuedo is also partly having to do with the actual model that's in the museum that everybody sees is a cast of the actual bones. So what we see is not
Pseudo.
Yeah, I think that's where they're going, and I'll see if I can't figure out more. But that's part of the story that I wish I knew more of. Just like with Off Color, we talked about, like there's some kind of story back there that is not easy to find. If I go looking on their website,
it should be forefront.
And it just seems like it should be. Yeah, they're working with the Field Museum, which is an awesome museum. I've taken my kids there several times.
Right.
And you grew up going down there, and Sue is just this iconic Chicago image. So yeah, I just want to know more. Like, why is it called Pseudo? Like, how did it work? Like, what does this have to do with anything?
It does feel like this should be something where they have. I mean, they just talk about the beer.
That's just the same thing that's on the can.
Right
is on the box there.
Yeah, it's just on the can. It feels like they would benefit from having a story and how that happened. I know Revolution actually did. Maybe it wasn't with them. It was at the Shed, where they have their Penguin beer.
Oh, okay.
Where they had a collaboration too. But I think this could also be going back to our last episode 3, conversation about corporations and companies getting involved with charities, and I kind of wonder if this is half of Iowans that I'm sure they spent some time traveling to Chicago either for beer events or just to hang out, and coming here you just end up going to our awesome museums. And so I think, just on the top of my head, I'll make the assumption that maybe that's kind of what this is about, that they wanted to more or less use Sue's name to draw attention to the Field Museum. So whether this is the Field Museum's marketing director or these breweries, I mean, you got to give them props, though, for having that many partnerships with breweries to be aware that the majority of 21 to 40, 50-year-olds are going to be drinking craft beer. And so if just the branding, if you're not there, people forget about you. And so, we're talking about it right now. And so it's clearly working in that branding aspect, is the fact that, oh, now we're talking about the Field Museum. Oh, now I want to go there. Now I want to see what event they have. And so it's just a smart move on, instead of spending some god-awful amount of money on a commercial, that they just kind of put their name on beer, which people will be holding, in 4-packs, 6-packs. And so as a marketing ploy or whatever, it's... and I'm not mad at them either for having, it's a good marketing ploy, because it's where people are. They're paying attention to the consumer, and that's where they want those beer drinkers to show up. Obviously not drunk to the museum, but they want them to show up and support the museum. Right.
And I'm just quickly reading Chicago Tribune article about the collaboration, and it looks like they were using the name before they got the Field Museum involved.
Wow.
And maybe that's why they called it Psuedo. But they actually started talking to the museum when they were preparing to launch in Chicago, with distribution in Chicago and Illinois, which that was about a year ago. So the Field Museum, eventually, through talking with these guys who had a love for the Field Museum, for Sue, they decided, this is actually a good thing for us. So they licensed the image of Sue, or permitted Toppling Goliath to use the image of Sue.
Genius.
And to use the Field Museum branding as they're preparing to come into Chicago. So, that's a really slick move. A little bit gutsy, kind of say,
a lot of gutsy. Yeah.
Hey, we've been using your your dinosaur. Could we put your logo on there as well?
Let's make it official. Yeah.
Right. But you got to. I mean, it
clearly worked.
Right, it worked, and again, it's a solid beer, very drinkable.
That's genius. That's a great move. It's a great move, and it kind of speaks to a certain sales aspect where, instead of really asking for permission, they kind of just assumed the close, and they got it. They got the close, and that's also what's even more interesting about the story, because we're talking about this, and it wasn't something where they're like, no, don't use this.
Right.
We're talking about the Field beer, so it's really smart on them, especially to come in. Since that was their introduction, it looked like there was something where the Field was the only place that had the beer for a while. Is that what they did?
Yeah, they launched first. They launched Pseudo Sue first with in January of last year at the Field Museum. They were the only one to have any Toppling Goliath beer for a little while. So that's obviously a great value for the Field Museum,
and them,
and for them, sure. I don't know that I noticed per se. I don't think I follow the Field Museum on Instagram. But if I was, I probably would have noticed. Hopefully they push that in some way.
True article, at least they kind of got that right up.
Excuse me. And it looks like the Field Museum itself has also, besides the off-color collaborations, has also done something with Two Brothers. So they're really seeing the collaborations as not like pairing with one brewery, but like, how do we work with whoever wants to work with us. And at least in Chicago, like we have some pretty solid. We have great museums actually, you know, and so that's a really fun way to kind of create some synergy, some energy around two brands is to do that. And you know what I would like to see now that I'm saying it is we have the Art Institute is an awesome museum, and like you have the art, and like whether you want to like quote unquote commodify the art by putting it on labels for the collaborations. Maybe that wouldn't necessarily be the way you'd have to go, or maybe you could do like partial, or you could like do, you know, inspired, you know, maybe an impressionistic label or an abstract label inspired by collections or ancient Chinese or, you know, artifact label. But there's a lot of richness in the Art Institute that could be fun for a brewery to work with.
And
so,
I think it speaks to the local behavior of a brewery and how you can actually really, really contribute to your community. Like obviously these guys are from Iowa, but they do have the other Chicago collaborations, and it just shows that with a little creativity you could really combine the two. I mean, obviously if they're opposed to drinking, then that's a whole another point, but like it's still legit. I mean, it's a real thing to like pay attention to as a brewery or as a business, that if you are a gallery or you are, you know, you have interesting images that you can lease out. It is, I mean, it's kind of commodifying, but at the same time, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I'm sort of over it, because in the same aspect, like you're like with their name, you're just really putting it in front of so many people that probably wouldn't have gone to the museum. And so if you have this, impressionistic, so now same kind of thing where you're based off of the, you have a similar, you know, label inspired by certain artwork that's in sponsorship with the local museum or gallery or something. I think it just helps both local businesses. And so I think that's a good way to partner and just to be a little more fluid with your kind of marketing stuff.
And looking at the website now, they and looking at their Instagram, they still have a very like startup, plucky, doing it yourself kind of look to them. Just a lot of shots of, in a good way, a lot of shots of their people and just shots around the tap room.
Right.
They do have a few sort of interesting, like they seem to be into this like balancing STEM, like tulip glasses on bottles and cans and things, which is, I don't think I've seen that before. But that's kind of fun. I guess that's like that shtick of theirs, and it looks like, but so it still has a very
entrepreneurial spirit,
right? For a brewery that was rated second best brewery in the world. That's real. It's a thing. It means obviously lots of loyalty, lots of support. For somebody, they only got 8-state distribution,
right?
And you get that kind of attention online. I mean, that's pretty amazing,
right?
So to do that and then to still kind of have that startup feel is pretty fun, I think. It's something I would probably expect to see them kind of slowly kind of veering away from as they kind of grow. I'm not sure what their growth plan is exactly. I think looking on their website, same kind of thing. Just look like there's like an old, like just a amateur, like somebody, they probably asked somebody to take a picture of them at the Field Museum with their Pseudo suit T-shirts in front of the skeleton. And so that's a fun feel. It's actually kind of funny to look on their website. To me, they're really on the About page focusing on, they have a section called Economic Impact of Beer Release Events. They have another one called High Quality Jobs. And they're really trying to show with the value they're bringing to their community. And what's interesting is most breweries like assume that they are bringing value. A lot of communities also assume that breweries are bringing value. They get it. The craft beer is popular now, and that craft breweries are not just the craft beer thing is not like a the riffraff or whatever.
Right.
They're serious businesses producing real jobs for people in the community and providing places for the community to gather. But when I'm looking on this site and seeing these sections that are kind of saying, like, here's how much money we're earning, here's all the testimonials of people who've been other businesses we've benefited from our release dates, including people who like the hospitality industry, who's people are coming from out of town for our special releases. Right. So to me, that suggests that they're having some problems in Decorah, Iowa. They need to kind of establish who they are, and that they have some value to offer, and that they're doing good for the community, and maybe that's just where they're at right now. I think there's certainly a place for that. It feels to me like more of the kind of stuff that you might want to put in like a short mailer you would send to your representatives or something to kind of remind them of the good you're doing. It's not as if your audience is Iowa, maybe that's then you're speaking to your Iowa people as you're getting an 8-state distribution now. And think about like, well, how is your story really more about not just like on that about page, not just what you're doing for Iowa and Decorah, but like who are you and what kind of experiences are you creating for your drink, the people who are drinking your beer, right? So that's where I would probably want to come in and say like, hey, can we tweak this a little bit? Is there a better place to put some of this information?
Like as a press section on the site or something.
Yeah, right.
It's true, and that is a way for them to bring their story to all the other states that they're kind of getting into. And I think their social media, as Brad mentioned, really is helping, showing that they're family oriented, that there are just like entrepreneurial people doing fun stuff, and so they're definitely telling the story with all the social media in that regard. So I think that's a cool thing. So I don't know, like this is actually embarrassingly, I think this might be my first foray into some of their stuff, and I'm very excited. I mean, you picked a great beer. The single citrus hop is a good one to start with. It's almost setting the bar too high, but it's a delicious beer. I think they're doing some good stuff, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing them all around Chicago. Any last words from you?
I'm feeling pretty good. All right.
2 cheers to Toppling Goliath and Maplewood. Thank you.
So that wraps up this episode of 2 Beers and a Podcast with Brad and Mike.
If you like what you've heard, please give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you have an idea for a topic and pairing, drop us a line on Twitter at 2BeersPod. If you want to learn more about our video, web, and social media marketing services, you can also find us on Twitter at 2BeersPod or 2beersandapodcast.com.
That's right.
Thank you very much for listening. See you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. More down. Ready for it.